all of us here at the Reagan Library are fascinated by all of your stories because we've been very fortunate to be living in freedom. And you, on the other hand, have lived under the totalitarian regime of communism. And yet you were a member of the Communist Party. When did you leave the party, and what influenced your decision?
Well, I was working from within. When I was a member, I set up a group of informal group of the economists in Poland to work on radical economic reforms, hoping that perhaps the leadership can be persuaded to launch them. But it turned out I was pretty naive, and I left the party. And I remember when this was on the eve of the introduction of the martial law in Poland, and this was the martial law in Poland was introduced on the 13th of December '81. The day before I left for Brussels. And then the next morning I woke up and I see the tanks on the street of Warsaw. But my decision was to go back to Warsaw. And the next day I went and gave back my party ticket because I thought this is, it was not many people are doing like that. And I thought I should do it, and I did it. So after I have failed with my attempts to change the system from within, I returned from abroad and I stopped and I returned the ticket.
And you studied economics in the United States.
Yes, we are very well informed. I've got my MBA from St. John's University.
Why the United States?
Well, perhaps by chance, because I was offered a scholarship in the US, and from somebody I just graduated from what was then called the Central School of Planning and Statistics in Warsaw. And from a young man, it was like a dream to go to US and to go to New York.
And how would you evaluate President Reagan's policies, his economic policies? Lower taxes, a tighter monetary policy, deregulation.
Well, as an economist who has introduced reforms, I greatly appreciated the main directions of these reforms, because first, I believed in low inflation. So bringing inflation down is very important and good for the people. Second, too much government is bad for economic growth and for prosperity. So less regulation, more freedom, works in every culture. So these supply side economics were very, very important. We introduced it in Poland, but we started from totally repressed economy, so we have to do much more than, say, in Britain or the United States.
So how do you do it? Because you are responsible for for leading the charge on these economic reforms in Poland. How did you do it?
Well, I had a hobby. I had a strange hobby. Starting in second half of 70s, I was very much interested in reforms, economic reforms. So I've studied them without dreaming that this could be of any use during my lifetime. But I created an informal group of then younger economists, and we've been working for 2 years. And when first Solidarity movement came into being, and this was in August of 1980, we are the only group who has worked in the systematic way. And we presented the results of our work to the broader public. We became pretty well known. Unfortunately, as I said, the reforms were not implemented. But we continue our work in the 1980s, which were a rather gloomy period in Poland. This was after the introduction of martial law. And then we've started how to privatize the economy, how to deregulate, how to put down inflation. So by chance, we are more or less ready with the strategy, but let me emphasize that while doing that, we have not foreseen and we have not planned and not even dreamt that we would be able to introduce these reforms. But Poland became free. To some extent, we have won this freedom, thanks to solidarity movement. And when there was a search for somebody who would take the responsibility for economic reforms and stabilization in Poland, they turned to me, and I accepted it, so it started.
And you had been a member of the Solidarity movement, right?
I was an advisor, but I was not sharing all the views of Solidarity because there was too much trade union in Solidarity. Mm-hmm. And I thought this is a good movement for change, but not for economic reform. So when they turned to me, well, the reforms I implemented were much more radical than what was envisaged by the Solidarity leadership, but they accepted that.
You know, growing up in a communist regime, do you remember? Did you feel repressed? Did you feel limited? Did you feel, or was this just a way of life and you didn't question
people
it?
adapt, but of course, what was the dream? The dream was to travel, because we were so constrained to travel, and this is probably why I have chosen my studies. There was the foreign trade, because foreign was a promise to travel, and it turned out to be economics. So I became an economist, partly by chance. And the feeling was, as in the 80s, that there is not much light in the tunnel, even though we realized that this is a very bad system, which is based on waste and inefficiency, lack of competition, and official propaganda, which is based on lies. At the same time, there was no, for the most of the people, including myself, there was not much hope. There was not much hope. But then, surprisingly, thanks to underground movement, there were a lot of underground publications, and almost everybody was participating in them, including myself. The system has come to an end, and a new chapter, a very good chapter in Polish history, was opened, has been opened.
How did you gain access to information?
Well, one should remember that even though Poland was a part of Soviet bloc, we were a bit more free. So, so there was less ideology, even in the economic studies, and the library at the university I studied contained Western books, so one could study if one wanted.
So you did have access. Did you
Yes,
listen
and
things like Radio Free Europe and
of course,
Radio Liberty? And
my father did it. Myself, yes, of course.
It's been said, of course, that Pope John Paul II was a major player in facilitating the end of communist rule. As a Pole, do you agree? And if so, why?
It's certain, even though it's very difficult to prove, because how would you quantify this impact? But that's very likely that since he has been listened by millions of Polish people, and he has spoken the truth. That's very likely that he has contributed to the emergence of the first solidarity movement. This is in August 1980, and this was a huge surprise, something unbelievable that you could have a free, non-controlled organization in a communist country, and at the peak, the first solidarity had 10 million members. Poland had 38 million, so a large proportion of the grown-ups in Poland belong to the solidarity which officially or formally was a trade union, but it was in fact much more than a trade union.
Did you ever believe in your lifetime that the Berlin Wall would fall and that communism would recede in the way that it has?
Mm. Well, you know, Berlin Wall has fallen as a consequence of previous changes. I know that it's very symbolic because it is very dramatic and spectacular, But the Berlin was a consequence of changes in the former Soviet Union and to some extent in Poland too. So when Berlin Wall was falling, Poland had already the free government, non-communist government, and I was serving as a deputy prime minister. And I remember this very well because Chancellor Kohl of Germany paid a visit to Warsaw. And he was caught by surprise by the falling wall in Berlin, so he had to interrupt his visit in Warsaw. He went to the wall, made a speech, and returned to Warsaw.
Do you remember where you were when you heard that Reagan called the Soviet Union an evil empire?
I was in Poland, and as most of the Poles, I liked it very much. He was very popular in Poland as in other Central European countries for speaking the truth.
And in 1987, when he asked that the wall be torn down at the Brandenburg Gate, do you recall that as well?
Well, not with all the details, but I have the recollection as an important event, yes.